Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week has a mantra. He says, I want to spread the word that if a black Brixtonian Rastafarian can make it with just a sauce, then you can make it too. Levi Roots is the man behind Reggae Sauce and all the products that have flowed from it since he burst onto our TV screens in 2007 when he took the recipe for his barbecue sauce to the Dragon's Den and got the backing of two of the Dragons, Peter Jones and Richard Farley, for £50,000 to turn his homemade sauce into a product that would be on the shelves of supermarkets and stores and processed foods all over the country. So Levi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Respect, Christian. Rastafari, bless you.
Well, thank you. I mean, tell me, to what extent have you made it? I mean, you know, how successful are you 14 years after that appearance on Dragon's Den?
Well, I was in Jamaica a few years ago. I often go there, but one particular time, a few years ago before lockdown, and I was going through back to my hometown of Clarendon. I was leaving from Kingston, just arrived, going back to Clarendon, and I'd gone through a toll booth, whereas you have to pay to go through to the next stage of your motorway. And there's a lady that was trying to take the money from me to pay through the toll. And just an ordinary lady in Jamaica. She probably doesn't have a TV. She doesn't. I could actually tell that. And she looked down at me and she says, "Oi, you're the pepper man from England, aren't you?" When she said that, in one of the most remotest parts of Jamaica, Christian, I can tell you, as a Jamaican. And I know as Jamaicans, when you leave and go abroad to foreign, as they say, when you come back, people don't really know who you are. They're more interested about their own lives and stuff. So when they do recognize you, they really respect to know you've made it. So at that moment, when she looked at me and she says, "Is you are the pepper man from England?" I knew that I had arrived. So I take that moment as saying that, yeah, I knew that I was famous then when that lady recognized me in my home of Jamaica, is going back.
Now, the brand is huge and your name is very famous as well, obviously. But I mean, to what extent have you personally made it? I mean, you know, when the Dragons come in and take a huge chunk of your business, are they the ones who end up getting rich, or do you do well too?
Well, I suppose it's a mixture of both. I mean, this is no different than actually going to the bank and getting a loan for your business, as many small to medium enterprise, young people do. They go to the bank, they're hoping for a loan, and along with that, they hopefully get a mentor, somebody that not just gives them the money, but also shows them, maybe this is the way, a better way to use it. I think investment, even on Dragons Den, like where I was, I think it's the same method. And the banks are looking back for their investment as well too. And so are these Dragons. And I'm sure that, for me as a person coming back from where I was back then, when someone like a Peter Jones and a Richard Farley, for that matter, on a show like Dragons Den, says, I believe in not just the product, but I believe in you, the Rasta man, then whatever is on offer, you better take it, because there's no better offer anywhere else where you're coming from. So for me, it was just as normal as anything else to accept that the Dragons will have to make money. But, I walked away with the better cut.
And I mean, you are evangelical about this sort of follow your dream idea, aren't you? I mean, it's all over your website. You do a lot of, a lot of talking to young people about it.
Well, I think if you're living it, you have to believe it. And if you are believing it, then you have a duty to pass it on, because you won't have any real other truth to talk apart from your journey. And if your journey is one of truth, then you have a duty to pass it on. So I think my whole life duty now is to tell that story, that if Levi Roots can do it, then anyone can.
Well, let's tell the journey then. I mean, Jamaica is where you start. And you were raised really initially by your grandmother. How come?
Well, it was back in the day, as actually, ironically, yesterday was Windrush, and it was back in those times when the British was advertised in Jamaica, telling everybody, there's jobs all over the place. This was 3 years just after the war, and most people in my part of Jamaica, in Clarendon, were people that thought was a great idea. We'll go and we'll do all the menial jobs and everything. This is my family I'm talking about, and any others. That was saying we'll go and do all that. But the key thing was to leave the kids behind, because for the Windrush, it was not mainly men at first that was on the Windrush. So all that was leaving the family behind. But the key thing was to work hard, do all these jobs that black people did back then in the UK and other parts of the diaspora. And the key thing was to send for the kids one at a time. And so the grandmas played a massive role in that, while mom and dad was abroad trying to build this empire even here in the UK, which they did. And in the middle of that is buying a house and then sending for the kids, and the grandmother in the middle of that looking after the kids. And every year as a child, I would see a suitcase arrive, playing around and I would run home, and my grandma would be in tears, and there'd be a brown suitcase, and I realized that one of my brother was missing. And as a boy of 8, 9, that's all I remember. And every year it would happen. And one day, sadly for me, I came home from play and I saw a brown suitcase. I saw my grandmother in tears, and I looked around and I didn't see any of brothers and sisters, because most of them had now left. And being the youngest, I didn't realize that one day my time would have come to leave her to come over to the UK. And when I realized that the suitcase was for me, it was one of the saddest moments of my life, because everything that I knew was what this beautiful, wonderful woman was teaching me, as she was mom and dad and everything to me, because my mom and dad had left, 4 years before that. So I didn't really have that connection with them. All I knew was her. And my time I'd come to the UK and found a different life.
And how was she bringing you up? What was she bringing you up to believe and think would be your future?
Well, it was mainly stories of what she knew as a young girl back then. And it was mainly about food and about Christianity. She was a great singer in the Baptist church back then. So she was a great one of making food out of nothing. We were very poor, so we couldn't afford the meats and stuff like that, but we grew all the provisions, like the yams and the potatoes and all the stuff that Mother Earth could provide. We grew that. And she was great at just making these gravies and these relishes, out of just the herbs and spices that we grew and couldn't afford to buy meats. And when you pour these gravies onto the yams and potatoes, you'd be thinking that you'd be having like an a la carte meal back then. And that was what she was good at. And she would always be teaching me about how to put these together, how to mix, the Scotch bonnet chili with pimento, with the whole spice and the thyme, and make something wonderful with that. So by the time I came, to the UK at the age of 11, I was schooled in pretty much a lot of these things how to survive. But the worst thing was I couldn't read or write. But I knew all the other skills that my grandma and what the locality and what everybody would have taught me as a 10-year-old.
Is that because you hadn't gone to school?
I hadn't gone to school because being the youngest back then, I think the preparation was more on the older brothers and sisters to come to the UK to be able to get through school pretty quickly and work. So they'd all gone through school. But, by the time my time had come, I hadn't done any school at all. I arrived unable to count, read, or write.
So what happened when you arrived here?
Well, the first thing that I remember that it was cold, and I'd never experienced winter. And as a 10-year-old boy, then coming from a idyllic place like Clarendon in Jamaica, where jumping fish in every lake and every tree carries fruit, and you have this massive 3-4 mile wide as your backyard, as everyone does, back then. It was really terrifying, as how it was back then. I experienced racism just by as you arrive, because back then in the early 70s, it wasn't pretty at all.
How did you experience it?
Well, on one hand, you had the fashion, and then you had the fascists, because you had one set of white people that I experienced that live locally that would be embraced you and wanted to know about the ska music and all the sort of stuff that is reggae, and wanted to know your family. And you'd go around the corner, and from the fashion, you went to the fascists. You need the skinheads that were not chasing you down and wanted to rip your head off as a young man growing up in Southwest London and having to go through places, that carried that.
Were you prepared for it when you got there at all? I mean, had your grandmother explained to you that, what might happen?
Absolutely not. And as for my parents who were here many years before getting to know the country, they hadn't really understood it as well. When I came over and I saw what was happening on TV, for me, it was quite funny to be seeing Love Thy Neighbor and all the sort of shows that was beyond. And that's what you was entertaining to my parents. That was entertainment to them. So I think racism kind of took more difficult for them because a lot of the times they had to spend a lot of time disregarding that because they had to work. They had to get a job.
Everyone says that, don't they? They were so busy surviving, they didn't have time to sit there worrying about what was going on.
Not for that generation, because they were the first generation. It was more difficult. I think now, because we are not that generation inclined, we don't have it that difficult from Jump Street. I think it's easier for us now to make ourselves known. But for them, it was about keeping the job going, keeping everything going. And my parents used to tell me that to forget about it, just get on with your life. So there was no preparation there for them or for myself when I experienced it.
Now, I want to get to the point at which you went to prison, and I want to understand what took you there. I mean, were you on a trajectory, from your teenage years in Britain to getting into trouble to getting to prison? Was that inevitable?
That word inevitable, I think it's a good one to use, especially if you were coming from where I was back then in the 70s. I mean, you're talking about the times of Brixton riots and all that. In the 70s in Brixton, if you grew up and you wanted a job, you didn't have an address that you could give. For me, I remember having to give my address as Herne Hill, and Herne Hill was the slightly leafier part of Brixton, just down the road from there. Where if you said you live from there on your address form to get a job, then you might just get a chance. But saying that you're from Southwest Line in Lambeth, you just never had a chance. If I was coming home from a club over in North London and I said I wanted to go north of the river, they would drop me off at closest Stockwell, but would never go to Brixton. I would have to walk the rest of the way. So that just tells you what it was about back then. But for me, talking about how you got into trouble, it was just a natural thing that you had to do, survive as a young man back then, because there was no chance, like now, you have someone like Levi Roots that identified with young kids that would go around and speak to them. For me back then, there was no chance of anyone looking like me coming around.
What were you like? Because I mean, I looked back at your Dragon's Den appearance last night, and you were this friendly, humble guy in 2007, and I'm trying to think who was the kid, Keith, or were you Levi by then? I don't know. Who was involved in firearms and drugs? Were you a very different person?
Well, it's a good thing you mentioned the name Keith there, because I do think that is part of my persona as well too, because that is the name that my parents gave me. But I think when I was inspired by music and wanted to come out of that situation of what I just explained of where you grew up in Brixton, where you felt like that is where you lived and that was all because there's no other opportunities. It was recognizing that there was something else out of that. And for me, I had to change my own self, including my own name as well, to be able to be recognized outside of that. So it's having been inspired by the music, but wanting to merge this thing of my grandma, bringing her sources and everything together, that forced me that I had to get out of that, out of the community, and be able to find a market that would accept a Rasta man with a guitar singing songs about his grandma.
When did you become Levi?
I suppose it was in school. I remember being in school and you were asked about, you were talked about slavery and all that sort of stuff. And I remember at the time, this sort of civil rights movement was coming through from America and everybody was sort of finding their identity and all that. And names came into it. And I remember finding out that Keith Graham was a Scottish name, and I kept, looking in the mirror thinking that I don't look Scottish. Something is happening. But I just, couldn't sort of find out why, because there's no Black History Month or learning about yourself back then. You either knew it or you don't. And it was reggae music that was coming from Jamaica through Bob Marley and other Burning Spear and other great cultural singers that was coming through that was saying to us Black kids back then that you're not Scottish, you're African via Jamaica, and so you got to find yourself. And it was through listening to music that I felt to myself that I've got to find me. I'm not Scottish. I got to find my roots, who I am. And it was through Marley's music and other reggae singers that I started to follow the Rastafarian faith as a young man, and sort of grasp that maybe I should choose the name of Levi, which was the month of June, which was the month I was born, and use that as my name to change from Keith. But Keith is an important part of me, but Levi Roots is the Rasta man that be able to me to express myself.
And what was it about Rastafari that drew you in?
Well, I suppose it's a lot of people are looking for now. I mean, after especially a couple of years ago with the George Floyd situation, where young black people are now trying to find their own voices because something has happened to make them wake up. And for me back then in school, it was the time of Angela Davis and the Soledad Brothers and Martin Luther King and all that kind of stuff. So it was a waking up time for me to find that, as I said, I found out that, Graham was a Scottish name, and through that I found that slavery had happened, all that. And you kind of taught yourself while you listen to music. But now it's a different thing. George Floyd was on the television right in front of us. So a lot of, kids nowadays actually saw it and had their waking up moment.
So what do you believe? What does it mean to you?
I was struggling like many black kids back then with Christianity. You just couldn't find yourself in it because my parents were Christian. Everything that we knew, most songs that we were listening to back then were songs from the Bible. And when I started to listen to Rasta men and Rasta songs, it taught me that something was beyond that, and I used to see my parents have this picture of the white Jesus on the wall, like every black, family back at front rooms had it back there with the blue eyes and that. And those moments were waking up for me to say that there's something beyond that. And Rastafari was teaching you that there isn't a white Jesus. That what we should do, as Marcus Garvey had said, was to look to Africa because there's a black emperor there, and if you want to find salvation, look to him. So it's not about a God thing, and it wasn't about a God thing back then. It was about finding someone that could inspire you as a young man to stand up for yourself and to know a different history from the Scottish one that I was, led to believe. So for me, that was an easy one to hang my hat on to say, to find who I am and not to accept what I was given through Christianity and through everything else that I've been brought up to believe.
Was that difficult to tell your grandmother or your parents that you weren't following their beliefs, that you were choosing your own?
I think because of the culture of Rastafari in Jamaica, it wasn't a story that I need to explain to my parents because Jamaica had created a religion of its own. And I think even my parents coming through the church were aware of Rastafari even back then and the teachings of Marcus Garvey and the reasons why this culture had risen up. So I don't think I needed to sort of sit with them to have a conversation about it. If anything, I think my mom was pleased that I had found something different that I could actually be inspired by. Because she knew I wasn't actually being inspired by her teachers because there I was, as you said, gone to prison for all sorts.
And I mean, is at this stage, is your life still, well, a bit chaotic? Are the people that you're mixing with and the life you're leading, is it sort of crossing over with breaking the law and doing whatever you have to do to survive?
No, I mean, my life before this is a part of who I have become today. I really do believe that, but it's a different person. I'm not one of these that would say I would change my path to take me from where I am, including going to prisons and all that. Because I think it's important to look back on your mistakes and learn from that. And when I go into prisons and go into schools now, which I spend most of my time, I mean, the business run itself. So all I do now is trying to give that message in wherever way, wherever I can. And I do think when I do go into prisons, and I'm talking to a lot of young black kids, that when I look at them and I see myself in that same position, 30 years ago, when I'm speaking to them about change, I feel powerful that I'm getting through to them, because I can speak from a position, from Jump Street to them, from the part of being at home with parents that you can't connect to because your parents are too busy trying to survive and avoid other things and don't pay you any attention and then you end up where you don't want to. So for me, it feels like a blessing that I can be able to talk to them about that. So my past actually helps me now to be able to get the message across.
And when you go into prisons and meet these people, are they basically in prison for the same reason that you were, do you think? Has anything changed?
You never know. And for me, it doesn't really matter. Whatever takes you there, takes you there. I think the message is always the same, that you can change. And it doesn't matter which science tell you anything else different. I would differ from that because I was coming from a place where you'd have thought that you can't change from that. But you can, but you got to have a few things in place and you got to have people to allow to put those few things in place. And one of them for me was starting to listen to someone else. Because a lot of the time, some of these young people that are in this position, they will not take another voice on that they really will trust. And I think that was one of the key things for me when I made my change.
Who were you listening to?
I think I was in my final year of being in prison, and there's a lady that came in. She was a sort of she came in as like a teacher. She would take students and try to, in reading classes and all that sort of stuff, drama classes. And she was actually one of the first person that sort of looked at me and says that something to the effect that you're not Keith, which is what the system knew me as. But when I'm walking around and representing my own self, I'm Levi Roots because that's who I am. But you don't get recognized as that within that establishment. And I think, if I can remember rightly, we were in the library at the time, and she had sort of said that you're not Keith, you are Levi. And for me, that was the moment that somebody else recognized it, and even I recognized it and decided that perhaps the switch, that when I was ready to be released and come out for a new life, that was the moment that I recognized who I was.
What did you think that new life was going to be at that stage?
Well, it was going to be different from where I was coming from, definitely for sure. You prepare yourself, but you don't know what you're going to face. So maybe that preparation that you did before, as I did, just didn't work. But you have to trust in what you know. And that's why you have to have yourself with as much education, wherever you are, whether if you're in prisons or whether you're in school now. The key thing is about education, so that whenever you get out there and you face whatever, you are able to be adaptable. And I think that was key for me when I came out and I eventually came into the business world. You have to be resilient, you have to be adaptable, and you have to be able to change. And you have to do it with a smile too, and not with too much of a brick on your shoulder as well.
So how were you making a living up until that point that you walked into the Dragon's Den?
I started 1 and 2 businesses. My first business when I came out was a small boutique just down the road from her. My brother actually owned the store, and I came out from prison with this bounding enthusiasm to do something. He had an empty shop there, and I said to my mom, if she spoke to him, would he let me have the shop? I feel like I could do something with it. And within weeks, I'd done the shop up, on my own with a few friends, put up a sign. It was called I Fashion Boutique. Managed to get a few clothes from a few people in there to hang up in there and start our business. Before I knew it, I was traveling all over the place getting clothes into the shop. And our fashion boutique was a massive success for about a couple of years. That was my first business. And the carnival came around, and then all of a sudden I was swayed away from business, from the fashion business to the sauce business.
So tell me about the sauce. I mean, how did it happen? Because obviously you had the story that you told on the TV program, which was then challenged later by the court case, which you won. So what is the truth of the source? Where did it come from?
Well, the truth is the sources came from me. The source was inspired by my grandma, by the stories, by her recipes, by the way that she cooks, by all my memories of her. I'd always felt like everything I cooked was her flavor. Well, it all started at the carnival. I think the Notting Hill Carnival was the biggest swing for me. I went just after the I Fashion Boutique went under. And the love of, I think, people of the sauce and the music inspired me to drop everything else and to start the brand. And every year was back and forth at the carnival. In between that was going to festivals, trying to sort of keep the the whole thing going until August come around every year. And every year we would make a big splash at the carnival until I was spotted by a Dragon's Den producer who asked me to come onto the show.
And how quickly did things move after you'd been chosen? Was it overnight success?
Well, it literally was. I think Peter made a call to one of his friends, Justin King, chief of Sainsbury's back then. Justin invited me to come down to have a chat with him about stocking the sauce in the store. He had seen the show the week before, a couple of weeks before, and inspired by it as well too. So it was great that he accepted to put the sauce in the store. 607 Sainsbury's stores, which was unheard of for a Caribbean product in those days, to go straight into Sainsbury's sales. So we signed a 6 month deal with Sainsbury's to be exclusive to Sainsbury's for 6 months. And after 6 months, the sauce was in almost every store in the UK, which was a fantastic thing for the product. But really proved Peter Jones right for investing in not just in the product, but in also the person Levi Roots as well.
So you were suddenly sort of pretty much in the heart of the British business establishment. How did they treat you?
Well, I like to say that I've had a fantastic ride ever since then. It's been a really amazing trip. It really has, Christian. And I can't thank people enough for accepting not just the product, but also my story as well. Because as I said, I try to tell the full whack at all times, and I try to express that it's not about who you are now. It's about where you're coming from as well, too. And I never try to hide that. And the public has accepted that. They've seen my frailties and everything to do that and accept that is who I am. And I think for anybody, the key thing is to be comfortable in your own skin. And they've accepted that. So I think that's the best way that I can feel about how this fame and everything has been brilliant for me. I have no bad stories about it. There are some slight edges there, as there always will be. But for me, it's been a absolutely amazing ride all the way since 2007.
Now, you've been telling your story for years, and trying to help motivate other people to make similar changes. But, as we've talked about already today, there's something going on at the moment, there isn't there? There are lots of different movements. There is a culture war that's going on alongside that, and a lot of identity politics. Where do you think, what you're doing sits alongside all of that?
I think where I would like to think I can help best is for young people across the UK and around the world who might have felt as I did when I was growing up, that you don't have a chance and there isn't any other way but knife and gun crime and gang crime. I think that's where my story fits. I don't think we're short of that story. I don't think we're short of that kind of inspiration either. And that's why I think it needs more people like myself who's been through it, to be able to stand up and talk to these young people. Not just to send a message, but actually do it in the flesh, because I think it works much better than that.
What do you think when you hear politicians saying things like the real problem is white working class boys?
I think somebody described it yesterday as cherry picking, in some kind of way. So I think there is a problem right across, the UK, right across the world for that matter. But my concern, are the young kids in my neighborhood. And that's demographic for me, because there are other people like me who are seeing their own communities around the country and around the world. But when I look around my community, I'm concerned about that. And for me, those are young black boys who are killing themselves or going into prisons because there's no way out for them.
Do you think that might be what's happening, that people in their communities are looking around them and they're all seeing problems and they're going, what about me? What about our people?
Well, I don't just go and speak into black communities. I go right across when I go into prisons, I don't just speak to black kids. It's endemic right across the world. Wherever you are, in whatever community you are, you face these problems, and you want the jobs. And for me, that is I think is the main thing that's needed for young people here, especially in UK and in my part of London, is jobs for young people to be able to get themselves, work themselves out of the community. I think we're missing out on some massive lawyers, doctors, and great kids don't have the opportunity like me, who can do great things, but just do not have the opportunity to be able to shine and show themselves.
If you look at schools in places where you grew up, there's a lot of good schools now, aren't there? London education has been transformed from what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So where is the, where is it? Where is the problem? Why is it still happening? Because it can't just be about education, can it?
Well, for Black people, it is about education, not just on our side. That's one thing. Our kids need to be educated. But I think on the white side as well too, that education is about educating themselves about Black people. And that's why when it comes to things about changing the curriculum, it's a really important thing, because if people don't know who you are, you cannot get on with it. And I think no one knows about their Black neighbor, but the Black neighbor knows about the white neighbor. Because I mean, my neighbor down the road, I know his history right through. I know, literally everything. Or if I don't know, it's because I didn't want to know. But there's no avoiding about knowing who he is, and I'm be able to more adapt to who he is and be able to express, who he is. But if I ask him anything about myself and about my history and about what makes me tick, beyond that facade of what he sees, what I speak to about my Black friends when I'm with them, for him to understand that part of me, he wouldn't know anything about that. And that's because in books and in everything that he's read, it's not his fault. It's because the curriculum doesn't teach you anything about that. So for me, the balancing up of that, it is key to get my point across that yeah, you can accept me because I'm just the same like you, because now you know who I am.
So we need to learn about each other and Black history, brown history, all history.
Yeah, absolutely. All history needs to be told. But as I says, I'm seeing it from my point of view right now, because I think Black history is not told at all, and I'm campaigning for that curriculum to change right throughout the UK and around the world.
How are you doing that?
Well, I think it's just to talk more about it. I think that's the key thing. I mean, yesterday I was talking to an outfit on an old parliamentary political event about the same thing with Diane Abbott and a few others. And we all agreed that I think that would be a key thing going forward, especially for young people, to understand them why when they get stopped and arrested and you get diagnosed as schizophrenic. A Black doctor might not diagnose it that way. You don't understand things like sickle cell, because it is not known and it's not written about too much, and yet it is a massive thing within the Black population. So for us, it's about education about each other, but it has to start in schools.
Can I just ask you about music? Because obviously, putting music in your food is your tagline. But how real is that? I mean, what do you think the real relationship is?
It's not about breaking up the vinyls and put it in the food first time. What I wanted to do when I came out of Brixton, when I found I couldn't sell the sauce in Brixton, when I started out, people were saying, Levi, we make our own sauces. We're all Caribbean, don't try to sell us something that we make and we perhaps make it better than you. And it took me a while to take that rejection and to get it. And I thought, I've got to get out here and find my market and go into what I call the shires back then, into anywhere that I had shire at the end of the name. I would find myself, at these nice country fetes and these chili festivals that they own every Saturday. And I would be there, and I recognized that people were buying not just the sauce, but the fact that I was singing songs and I was talking about my grandma and expressing my Caribbeanism to them that don't normally see that on a Saturday afternoon in a farmer's market. And for them, they were buying into that culture of the music and the food. And I'd written the song Reggae Reggae Sauce, that was sort of singing about that. And for them, they took the story on board as well. So for me, it is just a way of promoting the brand, promoting the sauce, to say, if you are going to buy into this brand, you are buying into Levi Roots' Jamaican ways, because you will see the sauce is very Jamaican. It has the Rastafari colors on there in green, gold, and red. It's notable. It's called reggae sauce. And when I'm saying put some music in food, I'm saying put my culture of not just the food, but everything that who I am as a Caribbean, as a Jamaican person, with your food and enjoy that. And I think people have been enjoying that and has actually got the sense of that over the past 15 years.
Now, if you could change the world in any way, just at the stroke of a wand, what would you do?
Well, I mean, I'd like to say something fantastic like, create, I don't know, some sort of cure for cancer. But I think I would go back to one of the key things that I talked about earlier, is just so that we can all get along, so that we can all know about each other. I think if we can fix that, and I think that would be one that's attainable, rather than saying something like stop world wars and all that kind of stuff. Is to make us be able to get along, make us get along with each other. Let's know each other.
Levi Roots, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for sharing your ways to change the world. Pleasure to talk to you.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that. If you did, then please do give us a rating and a review so other people can find this podcast. Our producer is Faye White. Until next time, bye-bye.